Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program for Monday, May 17th. If you're here for 100 questions worth asking, Letterpress Exploration in Quarantine with eBond, you're in the right place. We're just letting folks in from the waiting room right now, and we will be getting started shortly. So sit back, relax, and I guess just wait a minute or two. Thanks. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program. We're just going to be waiting another minute or two for the rest of our participants to enter from the waiting room. We will be getting started shortly, so thanks for your patience. Okay, it's now a couple minutes past the hour, so I think we're going to get started. So good evening and welcome to the Book Club of California's live online program titled 100 Questions Worth Asking, a Letterpress Exploration in Quarantine. This is a live online presentation by eBond, book artist, owner, and of Rough Draft Books. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the executive director of the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the webinar this evening. Tonight, we have more than 135 people registered for this presentation. So for those of you who are new to us, the Book Club of California is a nonprofit, member and donor-supported organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes, we do that with a focus on the literature and history of California and the West. The book club publishes limited edition books, a scholarly journal, and keepsakes. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, and much more. If you're not a member, or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest, but the benefits are many, and we simply cannot do the work that we do without the support of our members. So I encourage you to visit our website at bccbooks.org to join or to donate to the Book Club of California. And now for tonight's program and our presenter. The program is titled 100 Questions Worth Asking, Letterpress Explorations in Quarantine, and it's a live online webinar by eBond, book artist and owner of Rough Draft Books. eBond is an artist, an educator, writer, bookbinder, and a designer. She holds a BFA in graphic design and art history from Moore College of Art and Design and an MFA in creative writing and book art from Mills College. For over 20 years, E has worked as both a print and web designer for companies like Anthropologie and Gap Inc., while also serving as a professor of graphic design and book art in various college and university art departments. Her work has been published in 500 handmade books, inspiring interpretations of a timeless form by Lark Books, and 1,000 artist books, exploring the book as art by Sandra Salamoni. In 2018, she designed a Book Club of California publication and the related ephemera titled Florence S. Walter, Pioneering American Bookbinder. E makes digital spaces by day, handsome books by night. And I love this part. She hangs out with trees on the weekends and writes something close to poems in the spaces in between. Under the studio name Rough Draft Books, created in 2003, she makes one-of-a-kind artist books, printed pieces, and drawings that merge and blur the boundaries of art, craft, design, and poetry. Tonight, she's going to talk about her work and her 100 Questions Worth Asking project. If you have questions for our presenter, please use the chat and the Q&A function in Zoom. We should have time at the end of the hour to take questions, and we'll curate those questions from the Q&A and chat. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce E. Bond and pass over the controls for tonight's webinar. E, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone out there. I can't see you, but you can see me. Thanks so much for coming to see what a year of making in quarantine was like for me. Of course, it was a very, very singular year for possibly every human being on the planet, but personally, 2020 gave me some space to revisit an old project that I'd kind of lost faith in, and I was able to reignite it in a different way. Prior to 2020, I was working on a book project thematically about using questions as a tool for people struggling with their creative process. I was doing writing around this in my writing group and solidifying an outline and chapter structures for a book proposal. And I've been working on this on and off for like 5 or 6 years, honestly, in my downtime, whatever that means. But I was never really able to hunker down into the actual writing part of the project. I should also probably say right now that the book in my head that I wanted to create was both written and visual. So I had the bulk of the outline done and even chapters mapped out and tons of questions that I wanted in the book for readers to use as prompts and propellers and as inspiration. But I had hit a wall myself. So I put it away, as I sometimes do with projects, just to like give them space and then allow me some brain space actually to work on other things. So that was around 2019. So in comes 2020, and I guess, you know, we all kind of hit a wall. So I started to try to think about what is a way that I could enter into this project again, because I knew I was going to need something to keep me sane during 2020, and work wasn't enough. I knew I was going to need another project. So with the help of my writing group, I think they suggested, you know, maybe kind of try to enter into it a different way, like, and especially visually, since I am more visual, I would say, if I had to pick, than verbal. So I thought, why not use a format I was already familiar with to play with this content from the book? So enter the 100-Day Project. And I don't know if everyone is familiar with this, but it's a project that runs on Instagram. Every year, it's a community-based kind of collaborative project, but each project is self-run. You know, you basically just decide for yourself what you're going to do for 100 days, and you declare it, and then you post about it every day. And it's a beautiful thing to follow along with on Instagram, because so many artists are doing it, and you meet a lot of people, and you also, I find it's really helpful to propel an idea forward. So I'm always really interested in process too. So I do a lot of these kind of daily prompts or monthly activities. I like to do things daily to kind of keep myself in the mode of making or creating. So the 100-Day Project really works well for me. So in the past years, on the screen, I've just put up some of the projects that I've done previously to the one that I'm talking about today. So in the past years, I've done projects where I've made a book a day. I've made an imaginary map a day. I've even written a Cento, which is a 100-line found poem. So each day I would find a line that would then go with this poem. So on April 7th of last year, I decided to enter that community again, the 100-day project, with a project based loosely on in my book project. So to keep it simple and manageable, I was just going to post a question a day using some of the content I had already gathered and just see what happened. I wanted to put these questions that I was collecting out into the world without any context. So I didn't tell viewers like, oh, this is going to be a book or this is what I think. I just kind of would post a question a day and see which ones would invite conversation, which ones would invite answers, and which ones really would invite more questions, because that's what I'm always kind of interested in too. The format was simple. As you can see, these are just pictures of what you would have seen on Instagram each day. I was just typing out the question on a small piece of paper and I'd photograph it on top of whatever was lying around my studio. Like I didn't take a lot of time to think about the layout or the composition. And I did that on purpose because I'm so driven visually. I knew that that would start to take up all of the space, all of my brain space. And what I really wanted to focus on were the words and the questions. So I kind of had to make strict parameters for myself. Otherwise I'd get way too bogged down into like the backgrounds. Initially, when I started, I was using the exact questions that I curated for the creativity book. And you see, I've kind of put a bunch of them up on the screen, the ones that made it into the project. The initial ones, though, were essentially based in how to look at a process of any kind. Basically, something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. I was looking at the creative process specifically, but to me, that extended into almost anything. So basically, anything with a beginning, a middle, and an end. What I found was I did not stick to the script for very long. I was finding that the questions were multiplying, moving sideways, shifting older questions. Because now there was a new variable, right? It wasn't just me and my brain making these questions. Now there were people on the other side of these questions, which was fantastic. And they were asking questions back. They were answering them for themselves, you know. So things were moving and changing, as well as the world was moving and changing, of course, in very rapid ways. That was hard to understand, of course, being in quarantine. Everything was up in the air. So the questions also for me were a nice place to always kind of come back to and derive some hope, actually, from all the things that were going on at the time. So I just left it very open every day to see what would happen. And I started to not even plan for what the next question was going to be that the next day. I just would see what happens. Because it was also as if each question just pushed me to the next question and the next one and the next one. They were kind of inventing themselves. They started to order themselves. And they also started to interrupt themselves by what was happening in life, in our country, and worldwide during the spring and summer of last year. So within the project, I was starting to realize, with the help of my readers and participants at this point, like they were co-conspirators, that the questions were working on two levels. You know, I was viewing them through this framework of this very singular framework of creativity and a creative process, but everyone else was just viewing them from the framework of their lives and life in general. And I found that they were working both ways in this great kind of discovery. And because basically they are the same thing, you know, life and the creative process. Because if we go back to how I kind of explained it, I mean, anything with a beginning, middle, and end, I mean, that's basically life in a nutshell. So this was like such a nice feeling to start to see how people were answering them and how they were thinking about them outside of like the framework of how I was thinking about them. And it helped me in some small way believe in the project a little more, believe in this idea of this book, or this idea maybe being of some use to someone in the world. So as the months pushed on, I just kept notes of any new questions that started to come up, any questions that people would send me. A lot of people started sending me beautiful questions. It was so nice. It was such a collaborative thing. And some I would include, like if it felt like they needed to go into the world, and some I would just keep in a sketchbook. And also sometimes the questions would literally arise from something I was reading or listening to, like this top left one was from one of my favorite podcasts, the Slow Down Show with Tracy K. Smith, who is a poet. She was poet laureate for like two seasons. And she just asked the best questions. You know, every episode of that podcast had a question worth worth asking. So sometimes those made it in. And sometimes questions that came up in either my writing or older poetry classes now somehow felt very appropriate to bring up to people outside of a creative context, like who are just navigating life. Especially with the stories that were being told to us and around us, you know, in our news and in life in general. So these are just a few more to give you an idea. So as the project started to wind down in July, after the 100 days, I continued to work with the content, but I was also thinking about it again in a book form and not even really being sure if it should be a book anymore because it felt so good, like out in a communal space. And I also was really feeling the absence of other people's voices now with the questions, because now I was getting used to the conversation that was happening. So that was another aspect of the experience that putting it online really opened up for me. Because going back to like, I mean, one of my questions was even is a question and invitation, and that's what I was finally getting back from people. So as September rolls around, we're now in September of 2020. I found myself getting ready to embark on this amazing 1-month residency opportunity at In Cahoots, which is located in Petaluma, California, and run by Macy Chadwick. In Cahoots is a collaborative working space for emerging and professional artists to make work for specified periods of time. Now, I had applied for this residency back in 2019 to actually work on this book, but of course, not knowing so much had changed or would change in this year between applying and actually going. I also didn't even know if the residency would happen. You know, I mean, in the middle of quarantine, everybody and everything I knew was being canceled left and right. So I kind of resigned myself that it would probably be postponed. But luckily for me, it wasn't, you know, because I was so close. Petaluma is like an hour away. I was able to drive myself there. So that was safe. Macy's setup is completely COVID safe because each artist lives alone and they just come together in these very, very big spaces that you can definitely use safely. And also there's only ever 3 or 4 artists there at a time. So it was like the perfect place to go. So I packed everything about this project in the car and headed north to work again on this project. So my initial idea when applying for this residency back in 2019 was to really focus on the look and feel of visually how the questions book might start to shake out. It was my loose idea, and it would be based in how I could experiment with the letterpress as a tool. The equipment at In Cahoots there's letterpresses and a lot of printing presses there. So I wanted this to be my focus, but like, you know, any creative mind knows sometimes things don't work out the way you plan. So what I did was give myself like this loose list of intentions. So if I got stuck, I could experiment on other things. But when I got there, I quickly saw this beautiful vintage wood type collection that Macy has been, collecting in her space. And I knew immediately that I had to be working with that type in some way. So some things start to just make themselves known to you immediately. I also knew that I had to make some parameters for myself early on, just like with the 100-day project. So my parameters were loose, but fixed. So it was use only 12 by 18 paper as the base of anything. I could do whatever I wanted to that paper, but keep it at that size because it's perfect for like the Vandercook. I'm only going to use Macy's wood type, and whatever I can do with that, meaning like the sizes of the type that she has, that's all I can, like draw from. And I'm going to use questions as the content to get reacquainted with this gorgeous Vandercook press that you see on the left. Because I hadn't been printing, for almost 5 years. So I just needed to get to know this machine and remember, kind of like muscle memory, how to print. So that was it. Play and experiment. I've got the size, I've got the tool, I've got the content. Now let's see what happens. But I should pause here and also remind you what was happening in the world at this time. We were in September of 2020, and here we were going through some really, really extremely high temperatures and some massive wildfires that were affecting us every single day on top of COVID. So this is what I would see outside my little window by the letterpress. All of the air quality was unhealthy for most of the time. So we had to be inside and it was just very scary on some days when we would look out and see things like this. So I think that that's always important, like putting things in the context of like when things are happening in the world, because you can't really separate them. And looking back on it, I didn't realize how much these colors were also affecting the actual work, affecting my color choices every day. You'll kind of see as things go on, but it was almost as if I was seeing color or seeing everything through like a haze or this like gauzy film. There are not a lot of pure colors I was using. So anyway, a little bit about the process here at the beginning, since process for me is always such a big deal. And these images are of the beautiful studio that I was able to use for an entire month I was there. It was such a gift. But I think before I show you anything that happened within the month, I should also just let you know a little bit about like my process or like my inclinations kind of as an artist, kind of how I lean, I'm someone who very much loves process. I love iterating on something until you just can't anymore. I love the exhaustion of an idea actually. And I love making so much more than what is made. The product almost isn't as important to me as the like everything that it took to get to it. So I love extending kind of like the I don't know phase of any project as long as I can. So those are just the places that I kind of reside because I find them more interesting. So I wanted to also merge that because that's just innate in me, but also come to the letterpress this way. I wanted to like get to know this machine again, but also I didn't want to use it in the way that we sometimes think of tools as the end product of something like a computer or a press, meaning using it as a destination for the idea to become a product or a piece into the world. I was wanting to use it as a tool for iteration, not necessarily like multiplication and then here's a finished product. So that's kind of how I was coming out with it. I wasn't really interested in coming out with an addition of something or a completed thing. I just wanted to start at a point and travel any series of ways using that one machine. So first I had to get reacquainted and I had to think about like how I was going to work and what the process was going to be. Because here I had like 30 amazing days, what was going to happen. So in the beginning, I would just start with little sketches because I thought, okay, I'm just going to use these questions to kind of warm up. You know, I'll like set a question and type and make a print, you know, it was something that simple. So I'd start with a little sketch, as you can see, and then it would lead to a composition of some sort. Here you can see two different questions that are set. I was using kind of boards to lay out the type and how I thought the question would look. And I would do 2 or 3 at a time. And it was lovely because I could be really luxurious and selfish about this because I was the only one there. I was the only one working with wood type and working on that press. So I could, like, you know, set up a couple and let them sit there and then come back to them and see if they were good compositions and stuff like that. I also wanted to work quickly because of this whole idea of iterating like on the actual tool or on the Vandercook. I wanted to work quickly and make lots of mistakes and lots of prints. So I did tons of lockups on the press bed, like really fast and dirty, like using only magnets. And you can kind of see on the left, this is a lockup where the colored little rectangles are actually just magnets that are holding the type in place. But it's just a very quicker way to sketch. You know, I was trying to use the letterpress to sketch. And so I was able to work a little faster that way, which I found really helpful. I was also keep notes. I love sketchbooks, so I have one for every week, and because sometimes my mind moves faster than my hands, so I kind of need to give myself reminders of where I left off or what ideas I wanted to try on the press. And it's really important too for me. You can see some of these pages are really just like ink swatches because I always was wanting to print from light to dark to keep from having to clean the press more. So like in a day, you know, I would start with the lightest color and then work my way toward a black, like if I was ever getting as dark as a black, but that way I could just keep adding color onto the press and not have to clean it. So I'd map up a loose idea about what colors might go into that day, you know, and then see what happens. More planning here, just weird sketchbook pages of colors. And I also brought all my little pieces of paper with me that, you know, had the actual questions. And that way I was, well, you see, still revising and deciding which ones were going to be printed. So here is when I really start to print. And so like my little sketch on the left becomes this proof on the right. And I started off using this really large type. You see the word life is in this, I can't remember the name of it. I'm sure Macy knows, but it's this, she had these beautiful vintage letters and they are large. They're almost like 6 to 8 inches high. But as I started to do like the first couple posters, I started to realize that I probably couldn't keep down the road of using that really large type. I mean, it was so beautiful. And I'm happy that the first couple ones had it, but they were too large. If I was going to stick to 12 by 18, that one set of type was taking up like half my real estate. It also wasn't type high either, but I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I also brought a lot of a paper with me, just like found paper I'd used as scraps or whatever, paper that already had something on it. I like paper that's not blank, you know, like I like having something that's already started and then kind of reacting to that. So these are just printed on top of things that I brought with me to see how like the text would interact with whatever marks were there. And they were all kind of crapshoots, of course, like you don't know what's going to happen until you do it. This was the second poster I did. I was still like using the larger type. I think it was a European set of wooden type. So it was a little bit higher than type high too. So that was the other reason I knew I had to break up with this type, even though it was so beautiful, because it wasn't going to allow me the flexibility, one, to get more wordy questions printed, and also adding the variable of having to pack and change the the other letters, along with me packing and changing the paper so much. I was doing a lot of variables, so some things had to remain a constant. And so for me, at least the type needed to be that. So I found myself kind of settling into about 4 to 5 wooden typefaces of the collection. And I would just interchange and use them together for the duration of the project. And I mean, there were just so many beautiful ones to pick from. And you'll notice I kind of leaned toward the sans serif ones, the ones that were really bold, because the ink just laid so beautifully on them. But some were I would use be a little smaller, like this one for Can You Be More Deliberate? But so now we're getting into like the 4th or the 5th poster, and it's really starting to turn into like a project. I didn't really even think it was going to be that. I thought I was just going to use these questions to get reacquainted with the letterpress and then possibly make a left turn to something else. But that never happened. I just kept printing posters for the entirety of the 30 days. And I just let it go. It was so fun and I was so in it. So I could have gone on printing for just another month and probably never even, gotten through half of the questions anyway. But I'll go through a few of the detail, kind of some process explorations here, and then I'll just show you like a bunch of what was made. So this is the where is your blind spot question. And I just think this one's a perfect example of the question telling me how it needed to be printed, the words basically laying it out for me, and the meaning of those words, and just kind of let me know how I could approach it. Because as soon as I read it again and looked at it in this form, I knew that the word blind had to be blind embossed, which is where you're basically printing, but not really inking the letters. So it's just kind of kissing the paper and you see a slight indentation, So I locked up the entire poster, as you can see on the left, and then I removed the word blind so I could print that on its own. Let's see. So this is what the final print is on the left. And you can see I did add a little ink to blind because I think Macy and I were talking about this one. We're like, yeah, it'd just be nice if there was just a little bit of color, like a slight bit. So if it hits the light, you get a bit of a sheen, that was really pretty. And these are some other prints that, since I have it on the press, I then like to start to run lots of papers, different kinds of papers through it. So I'll have like 1 or 2 that might look like this, and then a bunch of other ones that are like one of a kinds. So the idea for my where is the opening print happened really quickly, just like this sketch on the right. But it took lots of experimentation afterwards to make it happen. I knew I wanted the word opening to be encircled by a mark that was made by me after the printing, like a handmade mark. So I did a lot of sketches like this on just regular newsprint, and the ones on the right are kind of just ink blots. I was thinking, well, what if I actually use the letterpress ink? And then I started to just draw marks. So the question for me started to become, what is the opening? What does it look like visually on the page? The images on the right were all these from these old sketchbooks of mine. And they were the shapes that kept sticking in my head when I was thinking about it. And so on the left, I'm like practicing with different brushes and materials. Lots of circles. So I just made lots and lots of marks, but ultimately decided that they couldn't be done then. So I just needed to print the type and then let the marks happen later. So that's what I did. So you can see the lockup on the left is very fast and easy, just 3 lines of type. The hard part really with this one was just like figuring out how much space to leave for the mark, because the mark was still uncertain. So I would, do a lot of test prints on newsprint, and on the right here, you can see where I'm starting to figure out, okay, this is enough space to make these shapes that I was thinking about in my head. So the one on the right is months later back at home when I finished a lot of them with the circles. So I just made a lot of different circles. So each one of these also is one of a kind. You'll also see, I even tried spray paint. I even did some like collage of some of the prints that were just done as sketches, ended up in some of the final prints as well. And these were just some experiments that I would do. I had some really old tracing paper. And I just kept trying to figure out, like, think about all these ways of thinking about openings. And I thought like these shadows were giving really interesting ideas about that. I kind of wish I could have gone off in that direction as well to like print those. But as the month went on, like things like the shadow examples and even these prints, I kept finding ways to allow the questions to tell me how to print it. You know, with this one, the test prints were telling me, like from a printer standpoint, they were telling me, hey, pack the M because it's not showing up, or replace the I with another one. But really what they were telling me was that the inconsistencies of this old, beautiful type was basically starting to explain the word emerging, you know, a lot better than I ever could, because it started to feel like the word was emerging from the paper because it was printed imperfectly, which was also the case for this one. What stories must you tell? I remember printing these on all sorts of papers that already had like spray paint on them or something, but they were like the same tone as this like hazy ink I was using, like this sunset color. And I was bummed about like how it wasn't reading as well in certain areas, and I remember Macy came in and she was like, why don't you pochoir just the letters that you want to punch them up? And basically, for those who don't know, pochoir is just like a fancy French way of saying like, use some stencils so that you can darken certain areas, or, I mean, that's how I was using it, but pochoir in itself is like gorgeous. You should like look it up. But I used some of my old test prints as my stencils. And so I started cutting out the letters that I wanted to make a little darker, because then I was going to use a brush and lightly use some ink to make those areas pop a little more. But I mean, as I was doing that, as I was cutting these stencils and I keep looking at them like this, I'm like, this is the poster. Like, this is the poster, not the other one. So it's so great to like always be surprised by like the thing that happens because of the process. Because I like this idea of what was getting left out and what was being shown. To me, that was starting to say more about this idea of the stories we choose to tell versus the ones we keep secret, you know? So anyway, this was the print I ended up loving. And these are just some other shots of it. And this was one that was then printed on top of a monoprint that I'd made there as well. So that was kind of fun. So anyway, speaking of stencils, once I got started thinking about those, I just became completely transfixed and everything was about a stencil. I was going stencil crazy, but the next poster, I started to use stencils in many, many ways. For the What Might We Discover print, I started with this idea, like I kept seeing the word discover kind of like being hidden by this forest, you know, or the leaves, you know, the leaves from this forest. And so I was like, I've got to figure out a way where I can hide type, but have it still be legible. So you'll notice I used some of the wider, the very bold type for the word discover, so that I could then kind of interrupt it with these leaves. And I was using really, really thin paper to cut out shapes reminiscent of leaves and put them on the press bed. So then you would see, you can see these are some of the first prints, because this one is like layer after layer after layer, you'll see. But this is how I was kind of printing. And here on this side, I've got a little video where you can see where I start to pull off some of the areas so you can see what's then left underneath. But I was like losing my mind at this point. I'm like, oh my gosh, stencils, I love this so much. So I did, let's see, sorry, I got a little lost here. Okay, so I also tried Tyvek stencils, or stencils, you know, where I was using Tyvek, because when I would try to do a larger stencil, it would, you know, easily break up if you're trying to use a thin paper because you're rolling it through. But the Tyvek is so much more sturdy and strong. You know, Tyvek is basically like what FedEx envelopes are made out of, you know, so that stuff is like super sturdy. But this is one where I was just, I think this is just actually newsprint, a newsprint stencil. So this one was very fragile. But it made some fun stuff. I mean, everything wasn't, you know, the thing about like working like this is like all of them aren't going to be winners, you know, like, and I'm totally fine with that. I actually love that because to me, they're just teaching me something. So, and by the way, I should just like kind of like zoom out and then just show you like, this is how I was printing. So I was printing like tons and tons of copies of whatever was on the press in whatever color I was printing, because I knew that at some point I was going to want to pull another piece and then run it through again. So I had to make sure that I printed a lot of things, because once the questions were removed from the print bed, you know, I wasn't going to lock it back up and put it back on the press. So here's just a little bit more of the Discover ones. I was getting really these beautifully subtle results. And I was just like, I didn't even know. Sometimes I was like, am I more in love with the print or what is happening on that wooden type? You know, I almost didn't ever want to clean the type. But this poster went on for like close to 3 days because I got so crazy with it. So I have about like 36 to 40 different one-of-a-kinds of these. But finally I had to let go. I had to keep moving. So the next one was the How Can I Ask Better Questions one. And with this one, again, I was still in that mode of thinking about these stencils in the beginning, but like slowly starting to realize like it might not work. This might not be the answer, you know, like for this one. But what I loved about this was what the shapes were making, you know, like on this second page, like this part. So I wanted to kind of remember that, you know, like, you know how sometimes you just have to keep that idea for something else. Because I was loving what was happening when things were starting to layer. But what I was loving more was even just these pieces, you know, just the singular pieces. So I kept all these for collages. But the shapes did make, what I was really interested in, you can kind of see in this slide, is, you know, how the shapes itself allowed for these organic kind of lines to break up the type, but also like layer these colors on one another. I mean, if I had more time, I really would want to go back and like perfect some of these or these ideas. Oh, that's just like a really pretty lockups. The type is so beautiful sometimes. And then these were other, again, once I've got the type on the press bed, then I would just print it on all sorts of things. So now I'm just gonna show you a bunch of the other posters that were made during the month-long fun Letterpress Love Fest. A lot of these, like you can see, this was a What Do We Sound Like Together, but this was actually just printed on an old piece of my master's thesis. You know, I just would bring a bunch of paper and just kind of cut it up. This one, Is There a Way to Simplify? I always laugh at this one because I am like the worst person ever at simplifying anything. I always like overcomplicate everything. So I made this really, really simple one on the left, but then slowly morphed into my real self and started making these crazy complicated ones on the right. These were more of the What Do We Sound Like Together, with just old letterpress prints from like something way back in grad school. I just printed on top of it. These were some really fun ones I started to do with What Do We Sound Like Together, because to me, again, it started to tell me what it wanted. And it was just like playing with this idea of reverberation and like what sound might might look like. These came out super fun. Some more, what is the opening? Some of these were old drawings, like really big drawings, and I just cut them up and then put those through the press. So they were collages. Same with these old collages that I put in. Oh, this one, I think it's like one of my favorites, although that changes like every other minute. But I just loved this one so much, this idea of all the other emerging, the things in the background kind of coming and going. And I loved, you can kind of see on the right, kind of what's left from this masking tape. I was playing around with how masking tape would print as a monoprint. And so then I took the monoprint and used it to put through the letterpress. You can see some of the leaves from the previous posters ended up in these posters. I just glued them down and printed on top. Oh, and these are a bunch of the Discover prints, so you could see how the stencils kind of morphed and evolved as I would kind of print. So these are just a bunch of different ones of those. It's funny too, because like sometimes it feels very much like a forest, and then on other ones, it feels like the ocean. Lots of Discover. Let's see. And then, so then here's some things that didn't work. You know, like I always like to, when I used to teach, I like to show people mistakes as much as like the successes. I had this idea in my head of like, I wanted all of the questions from all of the wood type, you know, on one poster, the one about like asking better questions. And I just couldn't get it to work, you know, like I couldn't get like the scale of things to feel right. I didn't have enough question marks, things like that. And I was playing around with like this line of question marks, as you can see on the right. And then I was like, how on earth am I gonna lock that sucker up? You know, like these ones that are going diagonal. But yeah, like my sketches on the left, on the bottom left, I wanted it to be more like a cloud of question marks, but it ended up on the right, which is not my fave at all. But I liked kind of what it made me have to do in this lockup to actually get it to print. So I think the lockup was more exciting than the actual print on that one. And oh, so all of these at the end now, you'll see like, it's almost like this accumulation, right? So for me, for someone like me, like this is my favorite part. You'll see most of my favorite prints in this area because this is where the magic happens for me. It's like, as the month goes on, there's this accumulation of stuff, right? All of this stuff that's being made on paper, test sheets, make readies, leftover stencils, mistake prints, you know, you name it. I don't throw anything away. I'm like classic hoarder. So like, I am just constantly putting the same papers back through the press. So these prints to me are so beautiful because they're like the accumulation of the time too. Some of them start from the very beginning and you can see all of these questions kind of happening on one piece of paper. So, you know, this is kind of the stuff that I wait for, the whole point of my process. It's where everything starts to come together and bump up against each other. So I like these ones where you start to even read them differently because like one question's on top of another. Some of these are still on like some old master's thesis stuff, but I also like when now the colors start to tell these beautiful stories because they've been kind of running through the press so many times. And yeah, and like for these, you can see like the questions start to bump against each other. It's like, is there a pattern emerging story? You know, you can just start to read them in all these different ways. And then somewhere like the compositions just become this perfect mix of like madness and still legible, which is beautiful. and some where things really start to become like texture and space, finally. Like I love when there starts to become a depth to things. So this is one of my favorites of all time, and it's just on like a piece of newsprint. But it's amazing to think that these really layered ones started at the beginning of the project. Like I can look back and see like one of the first questions all the way in the back, and then these last layers were made at the end. And so they kind of tell the story of the making. I love how this one is the same thing. I was using all this newsprint as packing. Whenever I was using stencils or something, I sometimes had to, or really, really thin paper, I sometimes had to add more packing to it to get it to imprint. And this is almost what happens when the backside of the ink happens. It's so good. And these are more kind of jumbly ones. And this was the last one I printed. So from that failure of the question mark one, where I was like, I want this to be a jumble of question marks, I thought, well, if I can't do that, what is this type actually allowing me to do? What is it lending itself to? And I thought, oh, well, there's enough differentiation in like the weight of, the weight of the type and the size of the type if I use it in terms of words. So I thought, okay, instead of question marks, what if I just use all the question words like if, are, when, how, can, why, So I ended up with this idea as my very, very last print. And it was like a really great one to end on too, because it was like a really crazy lockup, it's like one of those ones that take forever, but it's so beautiful when it's done. And so it was like a really great one to kind of end on. So then when I come home, I left the residency, I left with this box of stuff, and it took me a while to get through it. And some of the prints remained prints and posters, but I'm also a bookmaker. So a lot of them then became journals, as you see on the right. And also here on the right, all of those prints ended up as small, like sketchbooks and journals. And on the left, I even took some favorites of the one-of-a-kinds and got them digitally printed into smaller ones and ones that I could put on my site. But these are some of the journals that came out of the prints. That's one of my favorites. I don't think I have it anymore, but that one was beautiful. And then these are just some of the prints and posters that were sold, and like went out into the world and are now in people's homes. Like they send me pictures of what they've done with them or how they've gotten them framed and how they're living with them. So that's like the journey of these questions, at least up until now. If you want to see the first part of the project that started on Instagram, you can type in the hashtag 100 questions worth asking. Just know though, of course, just like life, everything changes. So other people have been using that hashtag. So it's not entirely mine anymore, but you can tell which work is mine. And the other projects that I mentioned really, really briefly in the beginning, my previous 100-day projects, the hashtags are here as well. And you can just like, follow me and see all of the strange things that I'm posting. Right now, I'm posting a lot of shapes, odd shapes. And because I'm doing a 100-day project, I'm on like day 13 of a project called One Good Shape for 2021. So I'm printing small little shapes every day from erasers. I don't know what it's going to be, who knows? It'll be interesting to see what kind of comes from that one. And you can always find me at my website, eBond Work. But thanks so much for listening and showing up after what I'm sure is like a long Monday. I love talking about this project. So it was my total luck to be here with you tonight. Thanks.
Are you going to keep this last slide up here for us to look at while we talk to you?
Yeah, you want? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I love all these yellows and blacks and the kind of the green, gray colors in this one. This is great.
Yeah.
So first of all, I'm going to thank you.
Okay.
So much for sharing all of your great work with us. I've seen a lot of it before. I've been to your website. We've talked a lot about what you're doing and how you've done it, but I'm glad we were able to share it with a big book club audience.
Yeah.
I'm really glad that you were able to share, I think you called it the project that kept you sane in
Yes.
like a crazy year. I think that's important to kind of share that as well.
Yes. Yes.
And I think you were really able to share with us how you are visually driven. I think that's how you describe yourself.
Yes.
And I think we can see that in all of this great work that you've done. So I'm really, really thankful that you were able to do that. And of course, you shared your processes and your challenges. So that was super awesome as well.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that you said a number of times, a question is an invitation.
Yes.
So let's get some questions from our attendees.
All right. I love it. I hope everybody has one. I want to leave with 100 questions. No.
We're going to make that the end. So yeah, so everybody who is here, E loves questions. So if you want to add to the 100 questions project, you can put them in the chat.
Yeah, totally.
And I'll supply the chat to E after tonight's the program, and she'll have another 100-ish questions.
Yeah.
Do this again next year. But we're going to start with some of the questions that people asked in the chat and Q&A. So,
okay.
Let's see, would it be possible to see all the questions in one place? Is there a listing of all the questions that you used? I think it's on one of your slides.
Yeah, well, there it is on, well, they're kind of, like broken off on that slide, but if you follow the hashtag, on Instagram, it shows all 100 that were used for that project.
Okay.
So you'd have to kind of scroll through, unfortunately, but at least you would be able to see every single one.
Okay. So yeah, so the answer is go to the Instagram account. And we're going to send that out in the email that goes out to everyone tomorrow. So you don't have to write it down or remember it. It'll go out to everybody how to get to E's page, her website, and her Instagram account. So you can
good.
Get that information. There also is a question, what was the name of the poet laureate and the podcast?
Tracy K. Smith. So Tracy K. Smith was a poet laureate for two sessions of that. Like she did it for 2 times in a row. And she was the one right before the poet laureate now, who's Joy Harjo. But for the entire time she was poet laureate, she did this podcast every day. And it was only like 5 minutes long. And it was like, I can't describe it any other way, but like, it was like a perfect prayer, like, because it was 5 minutes. She would just talk about something beautiful and hopeful, or just something about the piece of poetry. And then she would read the poem, and that was it. But she's one of the best question askers on the planet. I just like go back and listen to those because her questions are the best.
So there's this great question, and I had this as one of my questions. I have actually 4 pages of questions.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm going to have to call you tomorrow.
Let me get comfy.
My questions. So we're going to do most of the audience questions. So
okay.
But this is one of mine as well. Would you have started this project during quarantine if you hadn't already started it earlier? And adding a little bit more into this, you said that like you had lost faith in this project originally, like you hit a wall, and kind of what was that about? Can you?
I think for me, it was, I think the losing faith in it, it's something when you're in a process for so long, when you're working at something for so long, sometimes you get to a place where you can't see like the beginning anymore, and you can't see the end. And it's like this kind of place where you're like, what am I, like, is this useful? Is this like, what am I doing? I think I had gotten to that point where I was asking myself those kind of tough questions, like, what is this going to be? Because again, I thought, well, if I'm going to make a book about the creative process, it needs to be useful in this way if it's going out in the world. I just didn't want to make another book that wasn't useful.
Right.
Because I love books about the creative process so much. And so I didn't want to do it a disservice, I think. So yeah. And I think it also kind of hinged around to my apprehension always because I am so visual, the writing part always seemed a little tougher for me, like thinking about a project of that length but through the lens of just writing would stump me. So I had to always go back into it a different way through the way that was simpler for me.
Here's another great question, and checking one off of my list as well,
Okay.
which is awesome. And this one is, the way it's phrased is great. So it says, when you printed many versions of the same question, but like in different colors and with different stencils and different treatments, did your experience or understanding of the question itself start to evolve and change?
Yes. Oh my gosh. 100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's almost as if, like I said, with some of them, they were telling me how they wanted to be printed in the beginning, but then some of them I feel like revealed themselves afterwards. You're like, oh, is that the way I should be thinking about that word? Or, so it really was, or because it is such a visual, I mean, what is before you is so visual, but it also was a really kind of beautiful experiment in language.
Mm-hmm.
Because any little small shift of a word, like if I would shift one word, it would make such a big difference because there were only a few.
Yeah, this is great. The way the person posed it is like, did you start hearing it being said in different voices in your head?
Oh yeah, that's a great way to say it.
Yeah, yeah. Even when I look at some of your posters or your prints, like once I read it one way and I think of it one way, and then when I kind of scroll back, like on your website, and I see it again, I'm like, oh, that was completely different than the last time I looked at it. I'm like, well, now what? So lots of great comments. Wonderful, very thought-provoking, terrific slides, images. Thank you. Loved seeing the behind the scenes stuff.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm glad we kept that. Beautiful and inspirational. Someone said, awesome work. Absolutely incredible work. Someone did say, I didn't notice any question marks.
No question marks. Yeah. Through the whole thing, right?
After all of that, no question marks. What is there anywhere to see? Loved this. Is there anywhere to see this project? So the best place is the Instagram account, right?
Well, yeah, for the questions, for that beginning part where I was just generating the questions, the best part of that is the Instagram account. But I don't really have this documented anywhere, yet on my, I mean, I'm eventually going to just put them all on my site. But for now, I mean, the only way you can see some of them is in the shop on my site because I've been selling them. Like I said, like a lot of them had gone out because I just had so many.
Yeah.
So some of them I let go.
So that is actually a question. How many prints do you think you actually pulled, or posters did you make during those 30 days at the residency?
I don't know how many prints. I know I just ended with a box. Like I left with this box but the actual questions, believe it or not, I only printed maybe 20 questions out of the 100, like, so maybe a fifth. I actually, dealt with that content, but in terms of prints, I don't know. There were a lot of them.
Yeah, well, I think you said like there's something like 40 what we might discover.
Yeah, they were right of just those, right?
Of that one question, right?
Yeah, we got crazy. I got a little crazy on that one.
So someone asked, what was your favorite? But you already said that it changes minute to minute. Which one?
Oh my gosh,
but
it really does.
One or two that speaks to you consistently.
Huh?
There must be one or two that speak to you consistently.
Absolutely. It's really, oddly enough, this one always moves me. Like the more I look at it, like things start to shift and change, and it almost feels like it's moving. So that one always kind of comes to me. And then the one about the emerging, this one, I always come back to this one.
Yeah, I like that one too.
And I always come back to the jumble, this one.
That's the one with all the questions. The
yeah, it's basically, yeah, that one really, I think, has every single one that was made. But there's some of the Discover ones I know that I really, really like, but I can't remember. There's so many that they kind of start to just move around.
Let's see. There's a great question here about, because you said at the end, you took some of the posters and you digitized them. When you did that, did you change them in that process, manipulate them in any way when you moved them into
that space?
Yeah.
No, not at all. I just scan them. And then there's a printer in Oakland who just printed copies for me basically. But yeah, no, I left them exactly the way they were. I really just wanted a way to be able to share them with more people because I don't make editions, because I don't just settle on one print and then continue it. So many of these are just one of a kind. So that was the only way I could think about possibly sharing them, because people were starting to want certain ones, and I was like, oh, I only have one of this thing. So that's kind of how I started to scan them and put them in the shop.
Mm, okay. So there's an interesting question about how you keep the stencil, like the little leaves on, not moving. Are they taped down, or are they, how are they cured?
Yeah, so depending on which way I was going, whether I was taping, whether I was putting it on the paper, I would tape those down. But if I was just putting them on the type, I wouldn't even have to. Like I wouldn't have to tape or put anything down, because it really just stays in that spot. Especially if you've got like a little ink over it to begin with, it almost just like adheres to the space. So I would like run a layer of ink and then put them down and then run the print.
Okay. So there's a great question here about how do you choose your colors? Well, let's start with the question, or the statement that at the beginning you said in your process, you like set boundaries and limitations for yourself, right? Your paper was only going to be a certain size. You're going to use this type.
Yeah.
And the questions for the most part, and I guess the machinery that was in the studio. So
Right.
then how do you choose the colors? Like, how did you?
Yeah, well, that's weird because I never kind of belabor colors too much ever, because I love color so much. So I usually just go like full in, just start kind of mixing. But that's what was so odd about this. Like when I started to see those pictures of the sky and what was happening here in Northern California, and then I look at this slide, I really do see that I was very, very much influenced by just like the colors that were around me. It was a lot of like warm, and then these yellows and these kind of acidy greens kept coming up. And even when there was a color that would normally be pure for me, like if I would pick a blue or something, even those were toned down. I felt like they all had a bit of gray or a bit of something to them. So I don't know how much I was choosing and how much the universe was just kind of, guiding. Yeah.
Right. So this is Linda has a great question. Are you done with questions now with this project, or are you still fascinated by them? Well,
I'm still so in it. Yeah, I'm not done. I want to be done. I'm always like, I'm done with this project. I'm putting it back in the closet. And then something comes up where I'm like, oh, that's really cool, so no, I don't think I'm done.
I personally love that you said that the whole purpose of the residency the goal wasn't to come out with a project like a book or an edition of something.
Yeah,
it was really an exploration, and I think
totally. Yeah.
That was
so fun. I mean, that's such a gift, especially in last year, to one, even be able to go, and two, to spend a month like just thinking about one thing. Like you never get to do that. I mean, most people, I don't. I'm usually have a job and this and that and all these things that you're fitting in, and so that was great.
So we're 10 minutes past the hour, so we're going to need to wrap up.
Okay.
So there's still other questions in here, which I'm going to share with you after this. And we might want to get back to some of the folks. There's some very specific questions in here. Okay. There's maybe even a commission in here for you, which is terrific. I love that. This presentation is being recorded, and if you're a book club member, you'll be able to watch this over and over again, because this was a question, if we could watch this again, by going to the book club's homepage and registering for BCC at Home, which is our members only area for the book club, and you can see all of our pre-recorded webinars there, so if you're interested. So again, such great positive feedback. I'm going to share it all with you.
Okay.
I encourage everybody to go to E's website. I don't have it off the top of my head, but you want to just rattle it off?
Oh yeah. Here's the
Bond
slide
work.
again. E-bond work.
E-bond work. So they did have it off the top of my head.
There you go.
I did know what it was. So I like to close these with a quote, usually something that our speaker has said
Okay.
during the presentation. So you had so many great things that I had jotted down, like, oh, I'm going to say this at the end. I'm going to say this at the end. But the one I want to say at the end, it obviously applies in all of your work, but I think people can apply it in their daily life to almost anything. And you said, all of them aren't going to be winners. And I'm fine with that. They are teaching me something.
Yeah.
And I think those are some of the wisest words that we can live by these days. Not everyone's going to be a winner, but we can learn from it. So
absolutely. Yeah.
So,
that's how I approach my entire process.
That's great. I'm going to approach my life that way.
Yes, absolutely.
Be a winner, but I'm going to learn something. So E, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you
for doing this for us. And we definitely want to have you back to talk about One Good Shape, which is your next.
Oh, yeah, we'll see what happens. Who knows what that's going to do.
Project. We want you to come back and talk about that. I think people are very interested in these 100-day challenges and what happens on social media. We didn't get a chance to really talk about how this print project and social media and the people involved and how they drove and were, I think you said, co-conspirators in the creative project. I think that is itself a great conversation to have.
Totally. Yeah.
So interesting how they helped kind of guide this work and really drove it to this presentation and everything you did during the residency. So thank you again to our speaker, E Bond, and
thank you for inviting me. It was so fun. It was
Good.
nice to look at all this work again too. You know, like when you just don't see it, it's in a box or whatever. You know, so it was really nice to kind of look at it again and get to like talk about it. So
we got to see a lot of it, which is really great.
Yeah,
so I really appreciate sharing all of that with us.
Yeah, cool.
So thank you. And thank you everyone for attending this Book Club of California program. Please join us for our next online program. It's titled Artists, Books, and the Anthropocene on Monday, May 24th, which is a week from today, from 5 to 6:15 p.m. here on Zoom. Programming for the month of May here at the Book Club is all focused on the book arts. And this is going to be a live online presentation by Carrie Michelani Schroeder. She's a book artist and the proprietor of Coyote Bones Press. And she's going to be talking about her work.
And she's awesome. We went to grad school together. So come back next week.
And we did not solicit that endorsement, but I'm glad you gave it. You can register for this event online at bccbooks.org/programs. or using the link in the weekly programs emails that you may be receiving from the book club. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I hope you have a wonderful evening. Be well and take care of yourself. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.